Hey everybody, happy Friday. Welcome to the show, Around the Nation right here, TYT Nation. Jeff Waldorf with you. We did it. We made it through another week. Mostly intact, I believe. Or at least the country not quite on fire yet. Okay, California. We'll make an exception for California. I'm just kidding. In fact, the California wildfires are seriously a huge problem, so I hope everybody is keeping safe during those fires. I know that there's a lot of people that may be watching, and a lot of people that I do care about that are stuck in the fires. So, you know, that is obviously a huge climate change problem. We're going to have a story on climate change later on in today's show. That's really, really important. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that I'm not taking that lightly. But anyway, like I said, most of us have made it through the week. It's been a rough week, but then again, it's been a rough year. So, and we'll have, like I said, a lot of stories on that. In addition to climate change, we also have corruption inside of the Trump administration. Big surprise. A couple of stories on that. We also have Roy Moore. Oh boy. We'll start out actually with Roy Moore and some of his despicable comments. We have Papadopoulos. His fiance is speaking out. That's interesting. And we've also got the super delegates. That vote's going to be here soon as well. Tomorrow or sometime this weekend, they're going to vote on super delegates. So the two chairs have come out with an op-ed, and I want to read some of that. So, then of course we have Hillary Clinton and education. What education would have looked like under the Clinton campaign. So there's that. All right. We'll start out with, like I said, doing the Roy Moore story, and then we'll go deeper into all of the rest. So buckle up. It's going to be not so much of a fun Friday, but that's kind of the news. So that's how it's going. All right. Before I get started with my first story, again, I want to thank everybody who's watching. I also want to thank the Patreons, people who sign up and support us on Patreon. And you can do that by going to patreon.com/tytnation. You can find us there. That's how you can support us. I also want to thank everybody who gives us a like and shares our content. Really, really appreciate that. That helps us out a lot. So, and all that. Okay, anyway. That's enough about that. Let's get into the show because we've got a lot of stuff to cover. Okay. Oh boy. If you didn't know by now, Roy Moore is a disgusting human being. Now, of course, he allegedly preyed on women as young as 14 years old, trying to get sexual gratification from them. But even before all of that sexual harassment stuff and going after young teen girls came out, he was still a deeply troubled, deeply racist person. Apparently, during a rally earlier this year, he had overlooked the horrors of slavery because, hey, man, at least families were united. I'm going to give you his quote. At a campaign event last year, an audience member had asked Moore for his opinion on when the last time America was great. So this goes along with the Trump campaign, and their slogan, hey, make America great again. So one of them decides to ask, and this was an African-American asking, by the way, which makes it so much worse. He's like, hey, wait a minute. When, in your opinion, was the last time America was great? Now, if you ask a progressive, they're going to say, America at this point was great for, and it was never really great for everybody. In the 1950s, it was great for white working class people because we actually had strong unions, we had labor rights, we had high taxes on the rich. And the rich still did pretty well because they were still rich. So, you know, a lot of people point to the time after FDR as, hey, this is the time that America was great. But then you ask African Americans who were going through the civil rights era at that time, still dealing with the aftermath of Jim Crow, then they would say that it's not so great. Well, Roy Moore has the opposite reaction to that, especially when it's concerning African Americans. He said, quote, "I think it was great at the time when families were united. Even though we had slavery, they cared for one another, our families were strong, our country had a direction." Really? So his argument is, hey man, look, the time during slavery, yeah, we had slavery, but at least our families were strong. That's when America was great. It was great when our families were strong. Okay, maybe it was great for the families, although I will definitely disagree on that. Maybe it was great for white families, mainly white landowning men, but still not so great for the African Americans who were routinely ripped away from their families and sold to other human beings. See, that was something about slavery. See, for African Americans, they didn't get to stay with their families. They regularly got torn apart and sold off to other people. Some people couldn't even find their kids. Most people couldn't even find their kids because, again, they were slaves. They couldn't leave. They weren't allowed to go and find their family. So to say that, I mean, that was a great time in American history when families were more united. Again, you were massively overlooking the plight of African Americans who were at that point enslaved. Okay. And look, I'm going to disagree on some of the other stuff as well. The country had a direction. Yeah, you know what that direction was? Heading towards civil war. We also had cholera, dysentery, no national highway system, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no pesky science warning us about climate change. There was no women's rights. Yeah, I could see how Roy Moore could fit right in there in the 1850s. It fits right into that era, man. Ironically, again, that's what most Republicans want to do. They want to bring us back, not just to the 1950s, back to the 1850s. And that's not all. Beyond his views on slavery and allegations of sexual misconduct, Moore has also referred to Native Americans as reds and yellows and has questioned former President Barack Obama's birth certificate. Let's keep beating that racist dead horse. See, he's not really an American like us. You know what I'm saying? He's not like you and me. He's not really an American. I mean, just look at him. A birth certificate. Let's see the birth certificate. I've already seen the birth certificate. It's legit. Moore also believes that women and Muslims should not be allowed to serve in Congress. So this guy is about as regressive as you could get, right, on policy. So even if you leave out the sexual misconduct allegations, which are serious, right, especially going after 14-year-old girls and the attempted rape of a 16, 17-year-old girl behind a restaurant, even if you ignore all that, this guy is still a disaster. He was kicked out of, well, not only was he kicked out of a mall, but that's back to the sexual harassment stuff. He was also kicked out of the Supreme Court, or I'm sorry, not the Supreme Court. He was also kicked out of court for being a judge. He was kicked out of his judgeship twice in Alabama. So, but of course there are voters in Alabama, a very, very large percentage of them saying, yeah, all that stuff, but hey, at least he's not a Democrat. This is a man who thinks that America was great during the time of slavery. And see, these are the people that we have to keep fighting, right? People like Roy Moore. You have to understand that their entire point is to just drag us back to the past. It's not just about stopping progress. We have plenty of people who will stop progress or will say, oh, no, we can't move too fast. We have to do small incremental change. That's the only way that we can do it. No. And these are not those people, okay? No, no. This is about not only stopping progress, any kind of progress, even your incremental progress, right? It's about rolling everything back to where women had no rights, African Americans had no rights, where poor people had no rights, and where the world was basically ran exclusively by wealthy white men. No equality, no justice. That's Roy Moore's America. And to think that people are going to vote for this guy. Disgusting. Okay. All right. Now, before I get into the next story, I don't know what's going on with the notifications, guys. I know that people have been complaining about not getting notifications. I don't know what I can do on my end. I think there's special instructions on how to now get notifications from all your different channels, but I don't necessarily know how to do it. So if I find it, maybe I'll tweet it out. You can follow me at Jeff's Politics or at TYT Nation. And my Twitter account's been on fire lately, so if you're not following me, you're missing out. Okay. Anyway, let's get to the next story. We'll talk about some corruption, including the CFPB and how it's been taken over. All right, back to this. Acting director of the CFPB, Mick Mulvaney, has now settled into his role leading the agency. But see, I'm not convinced that he actually knows what he's supposed to do there. I mean, he's running the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and yet his first act seems to be that he is protecting a lot of the banks. Case in point, according to The Hill, Mulvaney is now mulling whether to let Wells Fargo get out of paying its multi-million-dollar fines for committing mortgage fraud. Well, now wait a minute here. That seems to be the opposite of protecting consumers. That's actually protecting the banks and saying, oh, yeah, I know you did all these bad things, but you know what? We're not going to make you, we're not going to pay that settlement. But wait a minute. Does he even understand what kind of agency he's heading? Well, of course he does. Because he's there. He's been installed there. He's been put there to turn that agency against the consumer and to run it for the banks. And the Wells Fargo case is pretty much an example of what he plans to do with the agency going forward. See, what Wells Fargo did is that they potentially charged more than 100,000 mortgage owners or borrowers, unnecessary fees to lock in certain rates. Now, these fees, of course, were exorbitant fees, and basically had the effect of screwing over the consumer. It's great for the bank, it's great for the profit margin, but again, it's an unethical practice. So under Richard Cordray, the CFPB ended up suing, and they were getting set up to recoup that money for their for the consumers, right, that were wronged by this bank. So, well, Cordray stepped down in order to run for office, and first he had appointed somebody to run it, but President Trump said absolutely not. And there's a pro-Trump judge that said, sorry man, Mulvaney, he's the pick, we're going to install him. Now there's currently a lawsuit undergoing on that, but for now, it looks like Mulvaney is the acting director. And now that he's taken over, the CFPB is now reviewing each of the 14 pending enforcement actions left to him by the former director. So he's looking at these and going, I don't know, man. I don't know if I feel like really enforcing these penalties against Wells Fargo. I mean, yeah, sure, they screwed over the consumer. Then again, they're a bank, and they're one of my bigger, they're one of the bigger contributors to campaigns such as mine. And I'll show you that. Now, but first, again, this is what he's been sent to this position to do. See, he despises consumer protections and, of course, has been a staunch ally of the banks for a very long time. In fact, listen to what he said on Fox Business about the role of his new job. He said, quote, "The structure of the CFPB is just fundamentally flawed. Authority that I have now as acting director really should frighten people. Really, so people should be afraid that you're going to act in their behalf when they get victimized by a bank." No, I think what he's speaking about, who he's speaking about, is the banks. The banks should be afraid of what I can do, of the authority that I have. Well, and they are. That's why they put you there in the first place. That's why they told Trump, hey man, look, Trump, we need you to put Mulvaney in as the acting director of the CFPB. He needs to help us. We need relief. We need help. And Trump said, okay, I like banks. I like financial institutions. I love the global financial elite. We're going to, yeah, I'll put Mulvaney there. Yeah, he can do whatever he wants. That's exactly what they did. Now, as far as his plan to run it, he says, we're going to try and limit as much as what we can what the CFPB does to sort of interfere with capitalism and with the financial services market. So we're just going to limit our power, guys. We don't want to interfere in capitalism or the financial services market. We're going to let the market do whatever the market's going to do. Well, see, we did that before in 2007, 2008, and the decade beforehand, after Bill Clinton, the Democrats, deregulated Wall Street. Well, we just let them do whatever they want, and then the economy crashed. The whole point of this Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is to make sure that the conditions that caused the 2007-2008 financial crisis do not happen again. And what are Trump and the Republicans doing? They're setting it back up for another financial crisis. What he calls interference, by the way, is what we call justice for the people getting screwed over and the people that will end up being hurt by a gigantic financial crash, which seems to be where we're heading. Now, again, it was proven that Wells Fargo had cheated their customers in order to pad their bottom lines, right? And Mulvaney is yet looking at those cases and thinking, you know what? I know he did that, or I know they did that, but what about my donors? I'm here to care about my donors, not you guys. Back to the Hill. Mulvaney said he's reviewing the various lawsuits the CFPB is involved in and has already sought delays in 2 cases where his opinion differs from Cordray's, and his opinion, of course, is dictated by the banks. Mulvaney also said he's analyzing the CFPB's budget for potential savings and continuing efforts to bolster the agent's cybersecurity protections. He's also instituted a hiring freeze in the CFPB. So, look, this guy is not interested in protecting consumers. He serves the banks because the banks are his donors. Back when he was serving in South Carolina, he received over $100,000 in legalized bribes from the financial sector that we know of. Again, this has nothing to do with the dark money that we can't see. He's received money from payday lenders, different banking institutions, and surprise, surprise, those very same donors he now is favoring as head of the CFPB. Make no mistake, the banks are now in control of what was one of the few, if not the only agency out there that was actually created to help look out for consumers. Unfortunately, that's the truth of it. It's going back to what Dick Durbin had always said. The banks, frankly, run the place. And that can't be more true than it is today. Okay. Let's move on here. Secretary of Interior Ryan Zinke just cannot help wasting taxpayer money. Now, in a report detailed in Politico, Zinke, who had some previous issues using government money for things that he shouldn't, has again been found doing things that he shouldn't with government money. For example, taking helicopter rides to where he could ride horses with Vice President Pence, among other things. Oh, that's fun. According to the report, Zinke reportedly traveled in government helicopters to trips that cost over $14,000 this summer, according to travel log records obtained via a Freedom of Information Act request. During one such trip, records revealed Zinke ordered an $8,000 flight to take him and his chief of staff to what they called an emergency management exercise in West Virginia. Now, Zinke justified this request by stating in the record that he was busy at work in Washington, D.C. I don't believe it, and wouldn't be able to leave for the event before 2 p.m. that day, making it impossible for him to make it to the event by car, which would have taken 2 hours. So, okay, if you're saying, look, it's an emergency manager event, he's got to be there, so, man, that's justified, right? Well, later on, Zinke's official calendar had revealed that the official event in question was actually just a swearing-in ceremony for Representative Greg Gianforte of Montana, who had won Zinke's congressional seat in a special election back in May. Now, what's interesting, if you guys remember that race, that's the guy who body slammed a reporter and still ended up getting voted in. This guy had his mugshot taken for assault, and still, voters for that seat were like, yeah, but at least he's not a Democrat. Terrible people, man. Terrible people. Now, Gianforte, of course, is a big ally of Ryan Zinke, and actually had his wife give him $15,800 to 2 of Zinke's different congressional campaigns. So, oh look, the Gianfortes are donors to Ryan Zinke, so of course Zinke's got to be there, and he's going to use taxpayer money to fly there. Of course he will. Now, a spokesperson came out to defend these trips by saying, hey man, look, he had to be there. They were official events. In fact, Interior spokeswoman Heather Swift said in an email to Politico, quote, the swearing in of the congressman is absolutely an official event, as is emergency management training. Okay, emergency management training, okay, fine, that's an official event. But the swearing in ceremony of your buddy Greg Gianforte? No, that's not official at all. Yes, it's an official event. That doesn't mean I want to pay for it. Doesn't mean the American taxpayer cares and wants to pay for it, okay? Now, this gets even better, this quote from Heather Swift. She added, quote, shame on you for not respecting the office of a member of Congress. So, here she is going like this.
Shame. Shame. Shame.
Shame on you for not respecting the office. Where's the respect? You know what? Where's the respect for the taxpayer? You're not paying for that trip. We paid for that trip. And maybe we don't want to pay for that trip. I know a lot of people don't want to pay for that trip. Who cares if you miss your buddy getting sworn in? That's not my problem. Why should I have to pay for that? If you really want to catch him, pay it from your own goddamn pocket. I'm sick and tired of being told to respect the office, respect the person in office. Fuck off. I'm not going to respect it. I'm not going to respect you spending our taxpayer money on bullshit. I'm tired of these congressmen, these government officials feeling entitled to our money while they, of course, want to cut our entitlements. That's money we've actually paid into the system that we're supposed to get back. They forget their place. They're supposed to work for us, but as I've proven over and over again, they work for their donors. They don't realize that they need us. They still need our votes. All right, there's more. In another case, Zinke traveled in a park police helicopter to and from Virginia, a $6,250 trip to arrive on time in Washington for a horseback ride with Pence. Does that sound like official business? Does that sound like official business? Oh, but don't worry. While he was also there, he toured a Revolutionary War battlefield and attended a discussion on the boating industry. And says, and Politico notes that a trip by car would have only taken about 3 hours. Get in the car and drive your happy ass there. We're not paying for a $6,000 trip. That's ridiculous. An Interior employee said that Zinke's trip by helicopter was warranted, given that he would have been able to familiarize himself with the in-flight capabilities of an aircraft that he's in charge of, and that park police personnel would provide an added measure of security to the secretary during his travel. You think that maybe he needs that extra security because he's out there flagrantly wasting taxpayer money? Maybe that's why he feels like he needs the security. But seriously. Oh, no, I took the helicopter because I wanted to learn how to fly it. You think Ryan Zinke's going to learn how to fly a helicopter? You think he's going to fly that? He's never going to fly that. Are you kidding me? No. He just comes up with the worst excuses to be able to steal your money and to go horseback riding with Mike Pence. Now, if you want to go ahead. Pay for it yourself. We're tired of government officials using our money as a fucking piggy bank. These are the same people that, by the way, complain about government waste, fraud, and abuse. Oh, no, we got to cut your Medicare, we got to cut your Medicaid, because there is just so much waste, fraud, and abuse there. This is all why his party is trying to give even more money to the rich, trillions of dollars in tax cuts to the rich. They do not care about fiscal responsibility. All they care about is robbing you for their benefit and for the benefit of their donors. It's disgusting. Okay. I'm going to take a quick break here, guys. We'll come back. We got plenty more stories to go. So stay right here. We'll be right back. Everybody, welcome back to the show, Around the Nation, right here at TYT Nation. If you haven't already, please give us a like and share. Again, I want to thank the patrons, patreon.com/TYT Nation, if you want to help out the show. Also, something you can do is a super chat. Super chat's super cool, so use it. All right, more stories. let's get into Papadopoulos. It's a fun story. I enjoy saying his name. Okay. It's an interesting story. Now, throughout the Russia investigation, President Trump and the White House have downplayed certain figures that were once inside their campaign. Of course, they did that with Manafort, and they did it with George Papadopoulos. Now, Papadopoulos, of course, was maligned basically as a low-level coffee boy. That's always fun. Now, that's actually at odds with what we know about the role Papadopoulos has actually played. Now, Papadopoulos has pleaded guilty last October to lying to the FBI about his contacts with Russian officials and is cooperating with Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team, according to a plea agreement. Court records show that Papadopoulos discussed with a Russian contact dirt on 2016 presidential candidate Hillary Clinton in the form of thousands of emails. I wonder what he was talking about. The emails, of course, were actually very instrumental in pointing out the corruption within the DNC. So I'm of the mind that I'm super happy that these emails came out. Nonetheless, these guys obviously knew about these emails, the existence of these emails, and we're talking about, and we're colluding on this issue. So anyway, this conversation, he said, told the Bureau he had before joining the Trump campaign, when in fact, this conversation happened when he was inside the Trump campaign, which would mean that the campaign was aware of these emails and was actually trying to collude with whoever had possession of these emails, which they say were Russia. Okay. Anyway, in the wake of the plea agreement's publication, President Trump, who once introduced Papadopoulos as one of his foreign policy advisors and an excellent guy, wrote on Twitter that he was a, quote, young, low-level volunteer. Michael Caputo, another Trump campaign advisor, said Papadopoulos was nothing more than a coffee boy. Oh, yeah, I told this guy to go and get my coffee, and that's pretty much all he did. Okay, how do you explain the picture when he was meeting with high-level staffers? When he was sitting at the table with Vladimir Putin? How do you explain that? Did he just walk up to the table and was just like, hey, Pootie, how's it going, dude? No, of course he was there on behalf of the Trump campaign. He was not a low-level staffer. He was not a coffee boy. Now, someone else who's now bolstering that story is, interestingly enough, somebody who might be a little bit biased, but this is his fiancée, Simona Mangiante, who had told ABC News that her soon-to-be husband was not the low-level volunteer at the Trump campaign that others had painted him as, countering that Papadopoulos was constantly in touch with high-level officials in the campaign, and Papadopoulos has the emails to prove it. So in case you're wondering, Jeff, there's no proof, right? No, they've got the emails, and Papadopoulos is like, I will give them to you. Here you go. Here's the proof that I was a high-level staffer and that I had done this. Now, she also said that Papadopoulos will instead be remembered not as a coffee boy, but as the, quote, the first domino in the Russia investigation. And I actually do believe she's right. I mean, look, first Papadopoulos pleaded guilty, and then down goes Manafort, down goes Flynn with whatever information. I mean, look, I don't know if Papadopoulos had information that brought Manafort down. It is possible. But again, there might be a connection, there might not be a connection. But if there is, well, then that of course proves that he is not the low-level guy that the administration painted him as. She continues, first of all, I would love George to learn how to make a coffee, because it's absolutely out of his skills. You don't know how to make coffee? It's pretty easy. She said that far from the inconsequential volunteer that others said he was, Mangiante said Papadopoulos, quote, set up meetings with leaders all over the world for senior Trump campaign officials. She said that she had seen correspondence between Papadopoulos and Steve Bannon and Michael Flynn, two of Trump's highest campaign officials. So, again, here's the Trump campaign and Trump himself lying about the role Papadopoulos played in his campaign. Why would you lie about that? Why would you say, oh no, low-level staffer, coffee boy? when he clearly actually played a much larger role inside of the Trump campaign. Why would you try to do that? Oh, right, maybe it's because you're worried about that Russia investigation. I don't know, maybe. Mangiante, an Italian citizen, said she was questioned by the FBI in Chicago about her past political work at the European Parliament in Brussels and about her work for the same Russian contact that Papadopoulos lied to the FBI about. She said that she received a subpoena in October, but was ultimately not compelled to testify before a grand jury because FBI agents found her interview sufficient. She added that the FBI has been, quote, fair. Okay. Now, fair. For somebody whose husband had done a plea deal with the FBI, she's like, hey, the FBI has been playing it straight. And look, I believe that because when you look at the investigation, when you look at what Robert Mueller is doing, again, he fired a guy for a lawyer that had anti-Trump messages, right? He's like, you're anti-Trump, you're off the case. I want this thing down the middle. I want to go where the facts are, and that's it. Like, we're not going to take the risk that this is seen as a partisan political witch hunt, because that's not the direction you want to go. You do want to play it straight, and that's exactly what Mueller is doing. He wants no question, no matter what he finds. He could find that Trump and the Trump campaign are completely innocent, and there was absolutely no collusion, right? He could find that, or he could find that there was collusion that would be criminal in nature. Now, whatever he finds, he wants to make sure that his investigation had been done in the most thorough and professional way, as to add zero question about the results. And that makes sense. That's what I would do if I were doing any sort of investigation. Now, as to her husband, Mangiante tells ABC News, quote, George is very loyal to his country. He's already on the right side of history, and I think he will make a big difference. Talk about loyalty. Hey, Papadopoulos, if you're listening, she's a keeper. Keep her. I might disagree with the loyalty part, as I think he did lie as it was proven that he lied to the FBI to try to get dirt on a candidate from another country seeking to meddle in our elections. Now, we've meddled in other people's elections, and it was wrong when we did that. And it's also wrong when another country tries to meddle in ours. That's a problem. And that's a problem that I would like to see go away. I would like to see us not interfere in other countries' elections, and I would love to see other countries try to not interfere into ours. That's the whole purpose here of finding out how we were basically meddled with, even if it didn't have that huge of an impact. And I personally believe it didn't, because again, with the emails, we didn't find out really anything that we didn't already know. It really confirmed our suspicions that there was rigging inside of the DNC in favor of Hillary Clinton, and that she was very pro-bank. Wow, big surprise, right? Nonetheless, this is the dirt that they tried to have. And you can see that you could say that it was successful because President Trump had won, but really, this was Hillary Clinton's race to lose, and she lost it terribly. Anyway, now, this information, whatever he had, whatever he gave to the FBI, was significant enough to warrant a plea deal. So that automatically pushes back, again, against the coffee boy thing, because again, Mueller's not going to give a plea deal to somebody who doesn't have any real information, who actually cannot help the actual investigation. Now, the extent of which his input helps the investigation, we're not going to know explicitly, but it had to be enough, right? Now, the other thing is, if he has any information that helps Mueller find out if Trump or any other member of the administration had done anything wrong, that will help find it. And in the end, make sure that they don't get away with it if there was any wrongdoing. And that's the whole point. Okay. Climate change. Now, if it is one thing that global climate change deniers love to say, is that we're just being alarmists about the effects of climate change. Oh, you guys, you people who believe in global climate change, global warming, you're just alarmists. There's actually nothing to worry about. The climate's always been changing. It'll be fine, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. Well, a new study comes out and shows that again, that criticism is absolutely bullshit. It undermines that criticism and actually makes the point that we have not been being alarmist enough about the effects of climate change. The Independent reports that according to this new study, current predictions of climate change may significantly underestimate the speed and severity of global warming. Meaning, sound the alarm. It's very possible that it is worse than we thought. In The Independent, they write, reappraisal of the models climate scientists use to determine future warming has revealed that less optimistic estimates are more realistic. The results suggest that the Paris Climate Agreement, which aims to keep global average temperatures from rising by 2 degrees Celsius, may be overly ambitious. Meaning that even if we do what we're supposed to do under the Paris Climate Agreement, which we are not here in America, we're still probably going to go way past 2 degrees Celsius. Our study indicates that if emissions follow a commonly used business-as-usual scenario, there is a 93% chance that global warming will exceed 4 degrees Celsius by the end of this century, according to Dr. Ken Caldera, an atmospheric scientist at the Carnegie Institution for Science, who co-authored this new study. The Paris Agreement, as I said, aimed for about 2 degrees, and we're not even going to hit close to that. Now, scientists have been using some of the most conservative models, not conservative politically, right, but more ones that argue for more modest warming, saying that, well, you know, things aren't actually that bad. Climate change is not accelerating quite beyond our control yet. So we've got time. If we've got time, we can do some slow changes over the next, decade or 2 decades, and we'll be A-okay. Well, that is not what we're seeing. Look, and I think the reason that scientists use a lot of these conservative models is because political conservatives continue to push back against it by saying, oh, you guys are just alarmist. Global warming is actually a hoax from China. And they're just trying to say, no, there's data here. Look at it. It's not end of the world stuff to make it more believable, but we got to do something about it. And that's the major point that they're trying to hammer home. It's not been effective, and it hasn't worked. So here's where we're at. Now, the study looked at all the different models and realized that the ones that with the higher estimates were more likely to be accurate, meaning it is worse than any of us thought, even the scientists who are now embracing the study. According to Professor Mark Maslin, a climatologist at University College London, who was not involved in the study, said that the results could mean cutting carbon emissions deeper and faster than previously thought. So that's how to push back against this. Since it's getting worse, we actually need bolder solutions, which would make sense. Now, he says, to achieve these targets in climate negotiations must ensure that the global emissions cuts start as planned in 2020 and continue every single year thereafter. And what are we doing? What is America doing? Well, we already walked away from the Paris Climate Agreement, so that's over with. And I criticize the Paris Climate Agreement for not being strong enough, for not being binding enough. And not only that, but, and again, the only reason that we walked away from it, the only reason that it wasn't strong enough is that America was like, you know what, no, half our population, or at least half the voters, think climate change is a hoax, so we don't want to enter into any binding contract because that's going to hurt business. It's going to hurt the corporations for no reason, for no tangible benefit. That's what it was there. The Republicans, man, the only party in the world where a majority doesn't believe in scientific evidence or facts or logic or reason at all. As far as Trump, well, Trump gets elected, and the GOP, this party that doesn't believe in facts, actually takes over as the dominant political party because the Democrats sucked so terribly. And what have they been doing since they got there? Deregulation. They've eliminated all these Obama regulations on the like the Clean Power Plan and things that actually help to curb pollution. And then Trump himself has been trying to prop up the coal industry that is dying, and they continue to push climate change as a hoax. The EPA under Scott Pruitt, for example, has now deleted all mentions of climate change. And so they're not even mentioning that anymore. They've scrubbed it. It's gone. While all these different studies are predicting even more terrifying effects of man-made climate change. And look, climate change, by the way, it's not something that's far off floating out in the future, right? It's not a specter that's going to haunt us 20, 40 years down the road. No, it's happening right now. California is literally on fire because the season has been so incredibly dry. And while you cannot blame one particular storm or one particular fire on climate change, you can blame conditions over the long term. It has been getting hotter. It has been getting drier over the last few years. We've been breaking records on hottest year. You know what the next year is going to be? This year was already the hottest year on record. The next year is also going to be the hottest year on record, and on and on and on. We're going to continue to break records because of climate change, because it's happening right now. The wildfire season in California has been extended by 2 months. It's probably going to be extended by 3 months next year or over the next coming years. So we also have an increasing number of superstorms. We had freak superstorms that were incredibly strong that have hit this year. Look, climate change is here. And it can and it will likely get worse. I mean, we can't stop what we've already done to the climate. That's already done. But we can do something to stop it from getting even worse. Because if you think it's bad now, it's going to continue to get worse if we do nothing. Okay. All right. We got 2 stories on the Democratic Party. I don't know if I should do school privatization or superdelegates first. Okay. Well, yeah, we'll go with this one. Okay. Now, President Trump is currently planning to expand charter schools and private school vouchers with the help of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. In fact, that's why Betsy DeVos was put as the head of the Department of Education, so she could push private schools and also deregulate schools as well. So private schools is something that Republicans love, right? Because it allows them to push things like creationism. However, on the other side of the coin, corporate Democrats also love private schools. And not because it allows them to push things like creationism. It's because it helps their donors. And there's a lot of large donors that are funding corporate Democrats. Now, that appeared to have been the case for Hillary Clinton. Now, back during the election, there was an overlooked WikiLeaks published document entitled Policy Book Final. Now, this file was attached to a 2014 email sent to John Podesta, that is Clinton's future campaign chairman. Now, the education portion of the document runs about 66 pages and mostly concerned on or concentrated on K through 12 policy. But it also captures specific input from billionaire donors that are looking to overhaul and, yes, privatize public education. Now, one of the most connected thought leaders discussed in this document is a woman named Laurene Powell Jobs. Now, she's the widow of Apple founder Steve Jobs and the head of the Emerson Collective, that is a prominent education reform advocacy group. Powell Jobs, who has been close with the Clinton family since the late 90s, also sat with Betsy DeVos on the board of Jeb Bush's Foundation for Excellence in Education. So there's the connection here. Hillary Clinton, Jeb Bush, Laurene Powell Jobs, all working towards the same kind of school privatization and the same sort of school reforms. So there are a couple different, sections to this, right? Where first they want to reform, public schools to be more in line with standardized testing. That's, of course, something that both Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton agree with, as well as increasing access to private schools and school vouchers. Now, the problem with school vouchers is that it takes tax money away from public schools who already don't have enough funding. And their funding model is of course, disastrously bad. Now, Powell Jobs, as I said, who was close with the Clintons and was on this Jeb Bush's foundation, also set up billionaire roundtables with Hillary Clinton's advisors through 2015 while donating millions of dollars to Hillary Clinton's super PAC, Priorities USA. So you have these massive Clinton donors that are pushing the idea of privatization as well as more corporate involvement in public education. Notes taken by Clinton aide Ann O'Leary were made in interviews with Powell Jobs and Bruce Reed, CEO of the Broad Foundation and former chief of staff to Joe Biden. According to these notes, the experts were calling for new federal controls, more for-profit companies, and more technology in public schools. Now, I'm okay with having more technology in public schools. I actually agree with that initiative. But the other stuff, well, that's problematic. More for-profit companies. And the federal controls, it would depend on what kind of federal controls were instituted in these schools. Now, according to the notes, one method of introducing more corporate control was targeting the teachers and actually grooming a new generation of teachers. In previous speeches, John Podesta indicated that recruiting and grooming younger, more compliant teachers was one of the plans to overcoming resistance to corporate education reform over the long term. But in the policy book, Bruce Reed also set his sights on teaching colleges, claiming that they, quote, don't deliver the goods. Now, what are they talking about? They're talking about teachers who are more, as I said, compliant with more corporate control over the classroom and more of a corporate curriculum. Powell Jobs suggests letting principals pick their teams, making teachers individually negotiate for salary, expanding online education offerings, and making teaching universities truly selective like TFA in Finland. Now, Finland's an interesting model because they pay their teachers extremely well, especially when you compare it with the United States. It actually has very low teachers, very low pay for educators, because we don't value education in America these days. It's to them more a commodity that should be bought and sold, and not a universal right that should have more funding, that should be, properly funded. Now, in a for-profit model, which is what they're looking at, teachers will be chosen on how little they will cost the company. So that actually drives the pay as well as the quality of teachers downward. There's more. There's evidence that Podesta, O'Leary, and Neera Tanden all raised campaign money from the same billionaire donors who want to privatize education and with whom that they were also talking policy specifics during the campaign. So they meet with the donors. All these people, part of the Clinton campaign, meet with the donors, and the donors are like, hey man, this is how we want to privatize education. Okay, well, hey, you can talk to us because you've given us money. That's the problem with the access. When you give money, when you're a billionaire donor, you have access to these campaigns, and you have the ability to help shape policy. That is a big reason why we need the money out of politics. Now, on June 20th of 2015, O'Leary sent Podesta an email revealing that the campaign had adopted two of Powell Jobs' suggestions, including infusing best ideas from charter schools into our more traditional public schools. So, again, they pay all this money, they get meetings, they get inside the campaign, and then, oh, would you look at that? Golly gee, they adopted these ideas from these private billionaires. Here we go. And the donors, interestingly enough, had also threatened to cut her off if she did not endorse some of their other ideas, including privatization. John Petrie, a founder of both Democrats for Education Reform and Success Academy, this is New York's largest network of charter schools, told the New York Times, quote, on Hillary Clinton, donors want to hear where she stands. Petrie was explicit, declaring that he and his billionaire associates would instead put money into congressional, state, and local races behind candidates who were favored a more, quote, business-like approach to education and tying teachers' tenure to standardized test scores. Teaching to the test. Again, I'm not in favor of teaching to the test because that's not a way that you learn. You actually learn by trying to foster a sense of critical thinking, which is what we do not do in high school. We don't do in K through 12 education. They try to do that in colleges. Sometimes it's unsuccessful, but I think in a lot of times it's very successful, and maybe we should actually foster a sense of critical thinking in K through 12 instead of teaching to a standardized test. The reason that they do that, of course, is that there are a lot of private testing centers that end up getting a lot of money and contracts. So that's one of the big problems here. Now, Clinton's advisors had warned her that these wealthy donors like Petrie, Whitney, Tilson, and Eli Broad could walk if she didn't support charter schools. Broad would indeed threaten to withhold funding from Clinton when she criticized charter schools for excluding difficult students. These are students with disabilities. Because what they want is that they want the easiest students. It's a lot like private prisons. Private prisons don't want difficult inmates. They want nice, compliant, non-violent criminals. And they want to get paid exorbitant amounts for housing them. Same thing with these charter schools. They don't want the people with disabilities. They don't want the student with autism that has episodes and sometimes acts out. They don't want to deal with those people. They don't want to deal with people with learning disabilities. No, they want the compliant students that aren't going to cause too much of a fuss that will end up making them lots and lots of money. That's what they want. In the end, Hillary Clinton, on a lot of these proposals, said, okay, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, just as long as you keep donating to my campaign, I will give you whatever you want. I'm not here to serve you, not the students, and certainly not the public good. I am here to serve my donors. And so, now there's one more thing here that influenced her decision, and that is the revolving door. Here you had top Clinton and Obama administration officials that ended up working for nonprofits run by people like Powell Jobs and Tom Steyer. Now, these experts advised Clinton to create and endorse an official education platform that featured a test-centric approach to teaching. Now, the article points out that this sounds a lot like what Jeb Bush and some education reform Republicans were pushing. And that's, of course, as I pointed out before, they had the same donors. A source close to the Walton Family Foundation told Politico, Clinton will have to walk carefully between both sides of the education reform debate so as to not alienate either side. And I said Politico, I actually meant Alternet. She'll be able to receive money from both sides of the education reform debate if she plays her cards carefully. Reading this, John Podesta wrote in a private email, quote, complicated. She won't back off criticism, and that's criticism of charter schools, but won't object to taking contributions. So that is the difference between the public and private position. Publicly, she's against charter schools, or at least is skeptical of charter schools and will speak out against them, but privately, she'll take their money. Wonderful. Now, this, of course, validates a lot of the criticism that a lot of us on the left have of Hillary Clinton, that, hey, man, she'll listen to you as long as you give her money. And that's exactly what happened. Now, there's another problem here. Again, there are people on both sides who agree with privatization as well as other pro-reform policies, like an increase in standardized testing and tying teacher tenure to standardized to that testing. Those people, they didn't go away. They didn't disappear when Hillary Clinton lost. They ended up in the Trump administration. In July, Powell Jobs was reportedly contacted by Ivanka Trump on behalf of the administration, seeking advice on shaping funding approaches for STEM education in public schools. So Powell Jobs is working with the Trump administration on their own sort of education reform. And so every one of these donors is working in their own way to end public education and replace it with corporate-driven policy and education systems. Things like, as I said, private schools, charter schools, vouchers, things like that. So in this case, it looks like that no matter who you voted for in this election between the two major candidates, it's pretty clear that the big donors and the private school companies were always going to get teed up for a big, big win. I guess it's lucky that we have Betsy DeVos, because she's been so incredibly incompetent at actually getting anything done. So I guess that's one sort of good thing. Okay. All right. Now, let's get into the last story here. In fact, let me take one last little break to get myself organized, and we got one more story. We're going a little long today, so we'll be right back in just a minute. Back and around the nation. See, I had to get back real quick, so told you it was a quick break. All right. One last story for you guys today, and again, it goes to Democrats, which I will now go after. All right. Now, with the DNC Unity Commission soon to vote on structural changes within the Democratic Party, the two chairs, the chair and the co-chair, specifically, have come out to voice their support for changing the rules. Now, according to The Hill, Democratic National Committee Chairman Tom Perez and Representative Keith Ellison, the DNC Vice Chairman, on Thursday penned an op-ed for CNN endorsing changes to the superdelegate system. Okay, changes to the superdelegate system. Well, that's what we were looking for, right? We want reform, we want change. We want the DNC to be better before we can actually support them again. And I know there's a lot of you out there that say that I will never support the DNC, and I understand that position, because look, Bernie Sanders and supporters and progressives, we got burned bad. And so I can understand why there are people that will say, never again, I will never again support or trust the DNC. Again, that's a completely understandable position. And to be honest, look, I'm skeptical that there will be any change from the DNC Unity Reform Commission, despite the work of great people like Nomi Konst, and others that are working to try to introduce change, and all the activists that are actually actively trying to change the DNC. Still skeptical, right? As I am. Now, I want to eliminate superdelegates, right? So let's see what they have to say in this op-ed and see if that's the direction that they're calling for. In the op-ed, Perez and Ellison asked the DNC's Unity Reform Commission, which is set to hold its final meeting in the weekend, to lay out changes aimed at healing party divisions, to endorse a significant reduction of the number of superdelegates who vote to decide the party's nominee for president. They said, in 2016, unpledged delegates, or what some call superdelegates, made up almost 15% of all delegates at the National Convention. To create a fair process for all candidates and empower grassroots voters, it is critical that the Unity Reform Commission provide recommendations that uphold the mandate passed by the 2016 Democratic National Convention and provide for a significant reduction in the number of unpledged delegates. The pair's call for a reduction in superdelegates comes hours just after 14 different progressive groups wrote a letter to Perez demanding a complete end to the superdelegate system. That, of course, is what I support. Eliminate it. Get rid of all the superdelegates. Now, I want to read you some of that letter because, look, I agree with it, and I'm sure you guys will too. They said, as Democrats seek to claim the mantle of economic populism from the Republican Party, driving historically plutocratic policies, the role of superdelegates in selecting Democratic presidential nominees stands out as a conspicuously elite-driven process. Furthermore, the superdelegate system remains starkly unrepresentative. The superdelegate system also undermines the Democratic Party's commitment to racial and gender equity and underrepresents the younger voters, forming the future of the party. So, here's the thing, right? So, I love that letter because I couldn't sum it up any better. That's exactly what the superdelegate system does. And so when you're calling for a significant reduction, in my opinion, that doesn't go far enough. Now, I know the Democratic Party, people like Tom Perez and the Hillary Clinton supporters, the Barack Obamas of the world, oh, they just love their incremental change, right? They love it. Oh, if we tweak it just a little bit, then we can call it historic change and, you know, not rock the boat too much. No, but that's not what we need. What we need is more democracy. Right now, did you know this, guys? Republican Party in their primaries is now more small d Democratic than the Democratic Party. They don't do superdelegates. They actually allow their voters to make a choice. Don't get me wrong, I don't agree with their choices because they're horrendous and they don't actually represent American values. But the Democrats have set up this elite system where only the establishment wins. People who don't rock the boat, they're the ones who get superdelegate support. Again, you don't have that in the Republican Party. I mean, look, this comes from the Democrats' weird idea that we have to run to the center in every election. And the Republicans do that. Obviously, they didn't do it in this election. And enough people turned out to vote for President Donald freaking Trump. So that's what we ended up getting, right? From the Democrats running to the center. Didn't work out, did it? A quarter of the country went off the cliff and voted for Trump. And the other half, of course, of that quarter, a lot of them held their nose and voted for Hillary Clinton. But around half of all eligible voters, people who could have actually taken part in the process, they stayed home. Why? It's because they feel that they don't have a voice. And policies like having superdelegates is partly the reason why. And yet the country, on issues like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, a living wage, taxing the rich, they're progressive. And yet because of things like superdelegates, candidates who propose these positions that are incredibly popular are don't even have a chance to win. Look, and speaking of superdelegates, Howard Dean was one of them, right? Howard Dean is a superdelegate, and guess what? He defended the right to vote against the people. If Bernie Sanders, for example, won a state in this past election, and he did, he won a lot of states. If the superdelegate there decided, you know what, no, I already pledged myself to Hillary Clinton, I want to pledge myself to Hillary Clinton, which, by the way, was done at the actual convention, I don't have to. I can go and pledge myself against the will of my own voters in my own state to go to a candidate that's establishment. It's got to go. It's got to go. Now, they ended the op-ed by saying, quote, "We love our values and the support of the vast majority of the American people by our side. And when we lead with those values, we win." I'm sorry, but no. Those values include democracy, which must exist inside of a primary as well. And this goes just beyond the superdelegates, by the way. We also need to change all the primaries into open primaries so we can get independents in the process. Guess what? Independents outnumber both the Democrats and Republicans. We need more independents. We also need to introduce things like ranked choice voting and ensure that everybody has a voice in choosing who is to go up against the Republicans and ultimately serve as leader of the country. If the DNC is truly committed to winning back progressives and winning independents and actually growing the party into something bigger, into something that can actually win, then they can no longer take these kinds of half measures. We need strong, bold, progressive change if we're actually going to win. Now, I hope that when the DNC Unity Reform Commission votes, they go further than restricting the role of superdelegates. I hope they vote to eliminate them. I know that there's many on that Reform Council who do, or the Reform Commission who do want to eliminate superdelegates and do want to make it more small d democratic. We'll just have to see if the rest of them actually will truly embrace real change. It's a defining moment in the Democratic Party. Don't mess this up, or you're going to lose an entire generation. Okay. Definitely went over today, but it's all good. I want to thank you guys for sticking with me, for watching the show. I want to thank the patrons, of course, for supporting us, patreon.com/TYTNation. I want to thank you guys for subscribing. If you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button. Helps us out, and then hopefully you'll get notifications when we're online. Even if you don't get notifications, we're live every Monday through Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern. So 3 p.m. Eastern time, we're online. So if you don't get a notification, you can always go to our homepage on YouTube, youtube.com/TYTNation, and you'll see we're live. I usually have the stream set up at least 5 minutes beforehand of the show, so, and most of the time earlier than that. So we'll always have the stream set up for you guys, so you can come here, you can watch the show. All right, thank you, everybody. You're awesome. I will be off on Monday. I do have meetings, so we'll see you on Tuesday. Have an awesome weekend. Love you guys. And remember, change begins with you. Good night, TYT Nation. You have an awesome weekend.